Hey guys, and welcome back to episode 11. Today I am going to be discussing the 1998 biopic about Olympic runner Steve Prefontaine, Without Limits. Um, some interesting facts about this, guys. So this came out in 98. It was shot in 96. It stars primarily main cast, three big names. You have Billy Crudup, Monica Potter, and of course the always iconic and legendary Donald Sutherland. It was directed by Robert Town, and it was also written by him and Kenny Moore. Some interesting tidbits about the actual movie itself, which I thought were pretty interesting, so I'll share with you. So it was originally shot in 96, but it didn't come out into 98. And part of the reason behind that was uh, the original producers were, well, still are the producers, excuse me, not just the original, were Tom Cruise and Paula Wagner, his longtime producing partner. But there were also some other people that were involved with the producing of the film. But what ended up happening was apparently there was a to do, I guess I think it was something to do with the direction of the script. And they said the hell with it. And they went off and did their own movie, also about Steve Prefontaine. And this movie was called Prefontaine. Both films came out in 98. The movie that was called Prefontaine just came out a little bit earlier. It's also an interesting film. It's not a bad film by any means, so it is worth checking out. I do say this one, Without Limits, is a much better film. I think the acting is stronger. The other one starred Jared Leto primarily. Nothing wrong with Jared. I know Jared won an Oscar, and he deserved that Oscar, in my opinion. But this film is a much stronger film. The performances by Billy, Monica, and Donald Sutherland primarily are just amazing. The chemistry is wonderful between those three main characters, and there's also a wonderful supporting cast. Also some other interesting stuff. At one point, believe it or not, Tom Cruise was going to star in the film. But by the time they got it into production and stuff, he was like at this point, I think like in his mid 30s, and it just felt like it wouldn't be a great fit because unfortunately our main star Steve Prefontaine died at 24, so it would be a little bit of a stretch. So that's some production information. When the film came out in '98, um, unfortunately it did not do too well. I think it made like $770,000 or something along those lines. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me. Um, it was in my theater. Luckily, it did play at my local multiplex, which I was in shock by. But it only played for like a week. And now over the years, I think it's made back its production, and it's garnered an audience by all means, especially if you're someone that is a fan of running, or you just enjoy that when the Olympics come around. For me, I connected with it on a lot of levels. Mainly, the first reason was back in the day, I was a runner. You know, I did cross country, winter track, and spring track for 4 years back in my high school days, and I loved the experience. What I like about I did long distance running, so that's what Steve did. What I liked about long distance running in particular was that you're part of a team, but it's also a very independent sport, and I like both aspects of that. I thought that was just something that just appealed to me. Another thing that I really connected with this film about is Steve and his attitude. The guy was a legend. He broke all sorts of records. Excuse me. And what's interesting about him is he did something that was not common. He did something called front running. What front running is essentially running out front. And you say, oh, well, what's the big deal about that? The big deal about that is you're exerting a tremendous amount of energy, much more than if you were just going in with the pack and waiting to make your move. Um, this was often a point of contention with his college coach, Bill Bowerman, who was played by Donald Sutherland in this. He often got into conversations with him saying, hey, like arguments saying, you can't do this. Yeah, you're king shit in America and you're rocking the world here, but like when you get to Europe, that's not going to hold up as much. You need to be strategic and find your spot in the pack and then wait to those last couple laps and then go out in front. And Steve's philosophy to that was, I can't do that. That's not who I am. He said, that's chicken shit. He was very outspoken, very blunt. He's like, when I run, it's a work of art, and I'm not going to do that. I'm going to run until I absolutely have nothing left. And that's the only way to run. So he often got into conversations with Bill Bowerman about how he ran. And there were some adjustments that were made on specific races, but for the most part, that was his philosophy as far as running goes. So Steve was just a unique guy. I'm going to take a second right now, and I'm going to talk a little bit about, fumbling my words there, guys, again, a little bit about the actual Steve Prefontaine, the real man. A couple things to know about Steve. I'm getting my cheat sheet here, guys. I started recording this about a minute ago, and something came up and I had to restart, which is annoying. So my papers are out of order. Steve was born in Coos Bay, Oregon in 1951. His parents were German immigrants. As a child, Steve was often made fun of. Some people think that part of the reason he became a runner was because as a kid he was taunted and made fun of and being chased, little Nazi, called little names like little Nazi and stuff like that, because of his German background and his German heritage. Unfortunately, Steve tragically died in Eugene, Oregon on May 30th, 1975. It was a sad event. It was often referred to he's referred to as like the James Dean of long distance running, because he died in a car accident. His car flipped and the car crushed him. It was just one of those moments in time I can only imagine. I was 1 year old, when he died, essentially. So I was still a little guy, but just crazy. He ran the 5,000 meters, the 10,000 meters, and the 2 mile. Like I previously mentioned, he was coached by the legendary Bill Bowerman at the University of Oregon. Bill would also go on to start Nike. I believe it was either 74 the first year. So long before Michael Jordan came along and Nike became this gigantic monster of a name. It started with a guy named Bill Bowerman. So it's pretty interesting. Bill Bowerman also would make the sneakers for the guys on the team. And I think that's how the early origins of Nike started. The college runners would come in and he'd have them measure their feet, and he'd be at home with his waffle maker, and he was trying to design a sneaker that was lighter, because a lighter sneaker makes it softer and easier on your foot, and it gives you less weight to carry, which in turn makes you a faster runner, essentially. So anyway, more back to Steve here. Steve ran in the 1972 Olympics, and he received 4th place. I'm going to get into that race later on in the review here. He attended the University of Oregon from 1970 to 1973, and at the time of his death, he held every USA outdoor track record between 2,000 and 10,000 meters. Guys, let me just say, I've known runners that were like state champions and guys that were just like rock stars. To hold that kind of status in the entire United States is just mind-blowing. It's absolutely incredible. What makes it more incredible is at the time, if you were like going to like the Olympics or something like that, you were officially, they call it the Athletic Association Union, something, I'm probably screwing that name up, but essentially it's back then you couldn't be sponsored by like a Nike or a Gatorade, or you had to work a regular schmuck job and train on your own. Nowadays, you can get connected with all these different things. You can get ad campaigns. You can find revenue. Back then, if you did something like that, you were disqualified. You were considered like a professional runner, and you weren't eligible for the Olympics or any of that stuff. So it was so much harder back then. That changed in the early 80s. At one point, Steve is actually like catching catfish and living on food stamps. So just to give you an idea how hard it is to be at that point an amateur, technically classified as an amateur runner, but then also trying to train, like I said, for these big events, and also, put food on your table and survive. So it wasn't easy back then. You would think someone of his level of talent, it would be easy, but unfortunately it wasn't. So that's a little bit about Steve. I'm getting my cheat sheets here, guys, so don't judge me. Hold on 1 second, guys. Bear with me. All right, cheat sheet about the actual film itself here. So Without Limits, like I mentioned, came out in 98. It was shot in 96. It stars the incredible Billy Crudup. I will touch bases on him in just a second. As Steve Prefontaine. We have Donald Sutherland as Bill Bowerman. We have the lovely Monica Potter playing Mary Marks, Steve's girlfriend. We have Jeremy Sisto in a supporting role playing fellow runner Frank Shorter. We have Billy Burke playing Kenny Moore. And we have Matthew Lillard playing Roscoe Devine. We also have a guy named Eric Anderson playing Colin Pounder, who is a tour promoter. And we have a guy named Pat Porter playing the Finnish runner Lassi Viren, who will play a nice little pivotal part later on, which I'll also get into. Now, to get into the man, the legend, and one of my favorite actors, Billy Crudup. Billy Crudup is one of those guys who's just iconic. He started in the 90s, graduated from Tisch in New York. He started his career with a film called Grind alongside Adrian Shelley. It was shot I think in 94, 95. Unfortunately, it didn't come out until 97. So that technically was his first film. Then in 96, it was a big year because he had Everyone Says I Love You with Woody Allen. He had a supporting part in that. And Sleepers by Barry Levinson came out in 96 as well. So neither of these roles were big roles. They were just little supporting parts, but you could see the guy had talent. Then in 98, we had Without Limits. And like I said, it didn't do fantastic at the box office, but it was pretty well reviewed. And I think you couldn't help but see this kid up there and go, wow, he's got a magnetic personality. He's got talent. Now, I could go into Billy's career. He's one of those guys, most people are like, oh, I've seen him. And some people are automatically familiar with the name. The big ones are Almost Famous in 2001 by Cameron Crowe. He played Russell Hammond. He literally played a rock star. So he played the rock star on the track in this movie, and he played a rock star in Without Limits a couple of years later. He won a Tony Award for Arcadia, the Broadway show, and he recently won a Emmy Award for The Morning Show in 2020, I want to say, maybe 2021. I should have checked that, but I didn't, guys. Don't shoot me. Obviously, I could get into Bill Bowerman. I did get into the real life Bill Bowerman. I could go into Donald Sutherland, and his career, but listen, it's Donald Sutherland, guys. You guys know Donald Sutherland. The guy's a fucking icon. What hasn't the guy been in? He's amazing, and he's does this role justice. He does a great job. Now, Mary Marks, which is played by the lovely Monica Potter, she's one of those interesting actors. When she came out, this is the first role I saw her in. She was reminded me of like a miniature version, a blonde version of Julia Roberts. I guess that's the best way I could describe her. Like especially facially, she just had that look. She went on to also be in the film Patch Adams, which I like with Robin Williams. A lot of people bash that movie, but that's another argument for another time. And then one of my favorite no-brainer cheesy flicks of all time, Con Air with Nick Cage. She played Nick Cage's wife, and that was a very small role, but it was a fun little role. And since then, she's done a lot of stuff in the independent world, and she's also gone on to do stuff for television and stuff like that. So this script was written and directed, like I said, by Robert. It was directed by Robert Towne, and the script was written by Robert Towne and Kenny Moore, who was a fellow runner and knew pretty well. Robert Towne directed Tequila Sunrise. He wrote Chinatown. He wrote this film, and he also directed a movie called Ask the Dust, I think it's called, with not Colin. I want to say not Colin Firth, the Irish Colin. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, guys. I'm losing it here. I got to get my facts down here. But that's nor here nor there. And he's mainly known for his screenwriting career. Like I said, he's done like 3 or 4 films. This being one I think is simply amazing. But right now, I'm going to take some time and I'm going to get into the actual movie, right? So here we are. So the movie starts in the 72 Olympics. The movie cuts back and forth, flashing back a lot. It starts off in the 72 Olympics, and you hear that iconic Olympic music in the background, and you hear a news reporter, and the news reporter is talking about the upcoming race. And they're talking about the different contenders for this race, the big 5,000 meter race. And he goes to interview Steve, and Steve basically says, listen, this race is it's filled the field of a ton of runners, but they're not going to beat me. And the guy looks at him like he's a little bit cocky, and he's like, if they're going to beat me, they're going to have to bleed to do it. He said it's going to be a pure guts race because no one's going to simply just walk away with the win without having to fight for it. He's just got this cocky attitude. So we start off with that, and you're like, oh, wow, this guy's got a strong personality. There's nothing wrong with being confident, but he definitely falls into that cocky category. The good news is that he can back his cockiness. I figure if you're going to be able to talk some shit, you got to be able to back it up, and Steve definitely can back it up. So that's a pretty good thing. So we cut from there, and the next scene we see Steve, and he's outside his house, and he's checking the mailbox, and he's obviously anticipating something. He's back in Coos Bay, Oregon. This is a cut to a scene, the next scene, where he's a high schooler, and he's anxiously awaiting some word for the scholarship. He's getting offered scholarships from everybody to attend their colleges, and he just wants to go to the University of Oregon because he idolizes the coach there, Bill Bowerman, and the assistant coach, Bill Fingerman. It's a legendary school for long distance running, and he has a shrine in his wall in his room dedicated to all the runners that went there, and Bill Bowerman and Bill Fingerman, and he just wants that. So it's like a rainy day, and you see a car pull up, and you see Bill Fingerman, the assistant coach, and you see Kenny Moore and Frank Shorter show up, and they say hi to Steve, and Steve tells Bill Fingerman his mom's in the house, just make yourself at home, and if you want anything, she'll make you some food. And he asks his two fellow runners, hey, you guys want to do a quick 10 miles? And they just look at him like, well, our sneakers are in the car. And they're looking at the rain like, do you really want to go out in this rain and go run 10 miles? He's like, well, what do you want me to go grab them for you? So they go for a 10-mile run. And while they're running, uh, they're talking about the University of Oregon, and basically Steve's busting Frank Shorter's chops. He's like, man, I heard about that race you lost, 3 weeks ago. There's nothing worse than losing, right? And you can see like the guy's like a little bit annoyed by this. Like, who wouldn't be? You're busting my chops. And then they asked Steve, and they're like, Steve, are you interested in going? And are you going to be going to the University of Oregon? And Steve's like, well, I've had offers from pretty much every major school in the country. And he's like, I'm still waiting for Bill Bowerman to reach out to me and personally extend an invite. Um, and the boys are like, hey, listen, that's not what he does. Uh, Basically, he doesn't believe in recruiting. He believes the most wonderful thing the university has to offer is the education itself. So they finish their run. They go back. They tell Bill Fingerman, the assistant coach, they say, hey, he says, listen, it's like, you don't have to impress my mom. You don't have to prove anything to anyone but me. He's like, you tell Bill Bowerman, unless I get some sort of personal invitation from him, I'm not going to be going to your school. And Bill's trying to tell him that, again, he's trying to repeat what the boys said already, like, hey, we don't do recruiting like that. That's not the way it works. And he said, listen, well, then I'm not going to go to your school. It's that simple. So we cut to Bill Fingerman. He's on a payphone. You can see he's frustrated. He just got out of the Prefontaine house. He's arguing with Bill Bowerman on the phone. A tense conversation. You can't really hear all of it. And then it's a couple days later, and Steve's anxiously still checking his mailbox. And finally, one day, magically, the letter arrives. And in the letter it says, Dear Steve, if you attend the University of Oregon, I have no doubt in my mind that we can make you the world's fastest runner. And that's what did it. That's the thing. He just, Steve just wanted that assurance from this coach, this icon. So next thing you know, we see Steve, and he's pulling into the University of Oregon. It's moving day, and he's in a little roadway right before the school, and he sees this incredibly attractive, cute blonde, which is Mary Marks, played by Monica Potter. And he's like, excuse me, can you tell me where MacArthur Court is? I think he's more interested in getting her attention more than anything. And she just, quite frankly, says, you're in MacArthur Court, and points to the sign right above where he's at that says MacArthur Court. So that's our first introduction to Mary Marks. Hold on one second, guys. The next thing we do, we see Steve in the locker room. And Steve is asking some of his teammates what Bill's like, Bill Bowerman, because he still hasn't met Bill. And they're saying, he just doesn't like guys that undertrain. And one guy's like, one other guy's saying, he doesn't like guys that overtrain, He said, he was in the military, so he's a bit strict, but he's a good guy. So Bill goes in and meets Bill Bowerman. Steve goes in and meets Bill Bowerman for the first time, and his first introduction, before he can have any kind of lengthy conversation, is take off your shoes. And Steve just looks at him. He's like, why do you want me to take off my shoes? He's like, I'm measuring your feet. And he's like, why are you measuring my feet? And he's like, I make all my sneakers for my runners. And Steve's like, well, why do you make all the sneakers for your runners? And Bill's, well, because if I make the sneakers myself, I can make them lighter. And if I make them lighter, it's easier to run faster. And Steve's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. So we next go into our first day of practice. And the first thing the coach says is, hey, we want you to keep the a certain pace, and I don't want you to overexert yourself, and that's the whole team essentially. And of course, being a front runner immediately breaks that. And Bill's like, "Listen, I told you to keep a pace for a specific reason." And Steve's like, "This is the way I run. This is the way I've always run." And Bill's like, "Well, if you want to continue running for the University of Oregon, you're going to run like I said." Steve's very cocky. He's very confident, and Bill is very stubborn. They're both very stubborn. They're both very strong personalities. So we cut to our very first race, and he's running the 5,000 meters, and he, of course, kicks ass because he's an iconic runner and he's incredibly fast. But throughout the entire time, he's front running. And Bill comes up to him and he says, "Hey, listen." Afterwards, he's like, "I told you you can't do that." And he's like, "Bill, this is the way I run. This is who I am." And Bill reinforces the idea, if you keep doing that, you're not going to have a spot in the team. It's that simple. But this is an ongoing thing throughout their professional relationship and their personal relationship. Over time, they both learn to respect each other and their differences. Hold on one second, guys. Next scene, we cut to Pri, and he is in a dormitory. The door is open. He goes in and he sees the lovely Mary Marks sitting there, and he's like, "Hi," and she's like, "Hi," and they recognize her, and it's like, so she's like, "I see you finally found MacArthur Court," and he's like, "Yes, thank you." She's like, "What are you doing here?" And she's like, I had to get some homework, something for an assignment for my homework." And he's like, "Do you want to go get a cup of coffee?" And she's like, "Now?" And he's like, "Yeah, let's go. Like, kind of, he's really trying to rush her out the door. And she's like, "I don't even have my shoes." He's like, "I'll get you shoes. Don't worry about it." So the next thing you know, you see him at a diner, and he's got multiple boxes of sneakers, and he's on his knees, and he's trying different sneakers. "Does this one fit?" And she's like, "No, get off your feet." And he's like, "What about this pair?" And she's like, "Okay, yeah, that's fine." She's like, "You don't have to buy me sneakers." And he's like, "No, you don't understand. I'm not buying you sneakers. I'm giving these sneakers for free." And she's like, "Well, you're still on your knees, and it's embarrassing." So he essentially tells her right then and there, he's like, "Mary, I'm crazy about you. There's something about you." And she's like, "You don't know anything about me." He's like, "What's there to know?" And she's like, "That's the whole thing. You don't know anything about me." He's like, "I know that there's something between us." And she looks at him, and you can see that she respects the conviction in what he's saying. But then, as that's happening, you see a bunch of girls walk past them in the diner, and they're saying, "Hi, Steve. Hey, how you doing?" And they're all wearing the sneakers, the free sneakers. Steve is a little bit of a ladies' man, to put it mildly. So that's you can kind of see that at that point she's not fully convinced. So we go from there, and our next big scene is the state championships. Basically, Steve is going to a practice. Bill Bowerman is coaching everybody, and Bill's sitting up a little bit higher. And as he's sitting up higher, he sees a girl jumping up and down on a trampoline. And she's kind of scantily clad. She's a gymnast, and he kind of loses his breath for a second because he's taken away by his beauty. And Bill Bowerman's saying, "Bill, or Steve, excuse me, are you all right? Or are you out of breath?" And he's like, "No, I just need to get some water." So Steve essentially goes and finds this girl and hits on her. And then later that night, they're engaging in some sexual activities. And unfortunately, Steve hurts himself he hurts his foot. It's like split open, and he has to get like 12 stitches essentially. Um, and the whole team is upset about this. Bill's like, well, that's it, you know. And Steve's like, no, we can't afford not to have me run. My race isn't until Sunday. That's 3 days. And some of his teammates like, are you crazy? You can't run like that. And Steve's like, Bill, let me talk to you. He's like, the team needs the points for us to win this meet. Without it, we're not going to win. Trust me, I can run this race. So we cut to Sunday, and Steve runs this race. And you're watching the race, and the whole time you can see that he's taking it seriously. He's running. I mean, he's running his heart out. He wins the race, of course, because he's Steve Prefontaine. And when he gets to the finish line, he just immediately takes his sneaker off, and you see the bandaged foot, and you see blood seeping out. The guy doesn't mess around. He's a crazy motherfucker. But that's his commitment, you know. So it's pretty intense. Hold on 1 second, guys. I am cheating a lot today, so don't judge me. Hold on 1 sec. So we get back to the University of Oregon, and Steve is hanging out with some buddies, and he sees Mary, and he's like, "Hey, Mary, how you doing?" And she says, "Are you still in the sneaker business?" And, you know, referring to his womanizing lady ways, you know, being a ladies' man. And he's like, "Yeah, but I'm willing to give that up anytime." And she just kind of walks away. You can see she's a little like muffed, you know, by this guy that, you know, was supposedly interested in her, and he's, you know, he's a ladies' man. He sees where she's going, and he runs to catch up to her, and he does. And when he catches up to her, he says, "Hey, what's going on?" And she's like, "Why are you just taking off? I was trying to get your attention." And she's like, you know, "Well, number one, that day that you came to see me, you weren't originally there to see me. You were there to go on a date with my roommate." And she's like, "That was not a nice thing to do." And he's like, "You're right, it wasn't, and I'm going to apologize." And he's like, "I think there's something there between us. You know, I think there's a connection here, you know." And she's just saying, you know, like, "I don't know." She's like, I think we're too different." She's like, "I'm a diehard Catholic, and I believe in God, and you know," he's like, "I believe in something too." He's like, "I believe in myself, and I believe there's nothing that I can't do." And, you know, they kind of get into a deep conversation about that, and the fact that they both believe in things, you know, and how important that is if you're gonna make it in the world, essentially. He basically tells her that, like, you know, like, he has talent as a runner, and he knows that. But he said there are so many more runners just on his team alone, that have talent. The difference is that he's willing to bleed to win. There's nothing that he won't do to win. And that's essentially what separates him. He said he doesn't essentially believe in talent. He thinks it's a matter of hard work. And he said, you know, if you want to learn how to fly a plane, what do you do? It's not talent. You go out and you take lessons, you know, and then you learn how to fly a plane. That's it. It's nothing to do with talent. It's a matter of how, essentially, his core philosophy is, how bad do you want this? And hold on a second, guys. So they have a nice little conversation. They make out. You can see that Steve's starting to make some headway with this girl finally. she's a lot more shyer than him, whereas obviously Steve is outspoken and a bit of a loudmouth. He's not afraid to say what's on his mind, but there is a connection there. Um, so we're finally to make some headway with the relationship, and next thing you know, they get to the next race, and uh, the next race is in the summertime. Steve's about to leave. He says goodbye to Mary. He says to her writer, she doesn't think that the relationship it could turn into anything because they are so different. And he's like, just give me a chance. He's like, I'm going to write you over the summer. He's like, I'm going to be traveling to Europe to face some serious competition. And she's like, okay, well, you can write to me. So he goes over to Europe with Roscoe Devine and Frank Shorter, with Jeremy Sisto and Matthew Lillard. And they go to run one of their first meets, the 5,000 meters, against some super talented European runners. The big one is Lassi Viren, who's from Finland, who's like the world champ. And they basically go to run the race, and they're stopped by an official, and then the official says that they were not sanctioned to run this race. And Steve's like, what do you mean we're not sanctioned to run this race? We came here to run here in Oulu against the top competition in the world. And the official's like, no, you are going to Helsinki to run. We talked to your promoter, Colin Powell, the guy that did the whole tour for this summer of running. And he said, you go to Helsinki. And Steve just loses his shit. Because at this point, the race starts without our guys. And Steve goes up to Colin Powell, the tour promoter, and he's like, you can't do this to us. What is this all about? And the guy's like running away. He's like cowering in fear. You can see that he's clearly upset. Then we see Steve. He's writing to Mary. He's like, dear Mary, we're finding out how screwed up the situation is over here. We came here to run against the top competition, and they're having us run against guys that aren't as distinguished. We're living on $3 a day, to survive. And meanwhile, the tour promoter, Colin Pounder, is taking money on the side to have us run at less distinguished places. He's like, we're running in the Amateur Athletic Union, which is what they're qualified as, is a sham. He's like, and if you give it up and go to become a professional runner, then you don't qualify. You can't qualify for the Olympics. So it's the whole situation is just screwed up. So we cut back to the fall, and school time is here, and he runs into Bill, and Bill basically tells him, what the Amateur Athletic Union and you have in common. And Steve's like, no, what? He's like, you're both stubborn and unwilling to change. And Steve's pissed. He's like, I can't believe you can take this so lightly, what they're doing to us. And Bill's like, you know what? They've been this way for years. They're not going to change, unfortunately. This is just the way they run things here in our country. So, that he could see he's a little bit flustered. Next thing we do is we cut to the qualifier for the Olympics. It's the big race before the Olympics in order to qualify. And basically, Steve talks to Bill, and he says, listen, the guys you're up against in this race are no joke. If you want to actually win, you're going to have to change your strategy. He says, instead of going out and giving it your all, he said, you got to wear this guy down. You got to wear these guys down. He says, the key in this race is to stay with the pack and to outsmart your runners. Draft for once. And trust me, you will come out ahead. He said, and when you get to the final mile of the 5,000 meters race here, then you can give it your all. Because at that point, you'll have exasperated all the energy from your fellow runners and you'll win. So that's what happens. He does just that. He follows that philosophy, and he pulls out the win, and he's on to the Olympics. So we get to the Olympics, and it's 1972 at this point, and it's Munich, Germany. And one of the first things Bill notices is that there's not any security. A little foreshadowing about to what's to come. And then we cut to later that night, and we see everybody surrounded around the TV, and we find out that the Israelis have been, the Israeli athletes have been, essentially people came in there, terrorists, and are holding them at ransom. What happens over the next course of days is they basically say, hey, listen, we want a flight out of here, and we want to leave safely. And then when we get out of here safely, then we can we'll let these guys go. So they get to the airport, and unfortunately, they are ambushed by the German police, and the terrorists, in retaliation, kill all the Israeli athletes. So it sets a very somber mood for the 1972 German Olympics, or Munich Olympics, excuse me. They have a funeral, and people are even wondering whether they're going to continue. At the end of the day, they decide to continue the Olympics, and everybody's kind of down, though. I mean, it's such a tragic event, and it's like the one place war or terrorists or any of that kind of stuff does not belong is the Olympics. The Olympics, like, has always been known for, even like back in World War II, like, people put aside all their petty differences and all their bullshit. When the Olympics came, that was put aside, and it was about the games. But they feel like they'd be doing a disservice by not continuing with the Olympics. So the honor of the athletes that have fallen by continuing with the Olympics. And we cut to the big 5,000 meters, and it's a crazy race because it starts off and you have all these iconic runners from all over the country. The big contender is Lassie Viren, but Steve is 21 years old, and he's no slouch. And the race, the first 2 miles of the race, everybody's boxed in the pack, and they're racing, and it's just hardcore. And like, you can see that Steve's struggling to work his way up because everybody's boxed in so tightly. Like, the guy from first place to last place, it's like you can hardly tell the difference because they're that close together. We get to the final mile, and Steve manages to work his way through and break free from the pack. And he's leading, he's running his heart out. And he's back and forth with Lassie Viren, the Finnish runner, who's just a beast as well. And it's back and forth between those guys for like the first 3 laps. We get into the 4th lap of the 5,000 meters, and you get to the final stretch, and unfortunately Steve he loses all his energy, and even so, he's still, like, in that final stretch, he's like very clearly clinched 3rd place, but at this point his energy is completely shot, and he just dies, and he's overtaken, and he ends up with 4th place, unfortunately. He's very distressed about this. We cut to back to Eugene, Oregon, and Steve is outside with his dog, outside of his trailer. Mary shows up, and she's like, I see you don't answer your phone calls anymore. And he's like, I'm sorry, I've just been really busy between training and living life, and she enters the trailer, and she's like, everything's gone. Everything about you there's no trophies, no news clippings, nothing. Everything that signified your personality is gone. And he's like, Mary, what do you want from me? She's like, what happened to you? She's like, you killed it in Munich. He's like, yeah, but it doesn't matter because I lost. And she's like, you will come back and you will be better than ever. You just have to believe in yourself like I believe in you. And he's like, Mary, I gotta go to work. I'm sorry. And she sees the shirt that he's wearing, and it's a local bar in town. She's like, oh, so you're a bartender now? And he's like, Mary, what do you want from me? I'm living on food stamps, and I can't do that. I need to be able to eat like a human being. I have bills to pay still. I'm in the real world now. He had graduated from college at this point. So we cut to Steve, and it's at the bar, and it's at night, and he's like, hey, what can I get everybody? And in walks Bill Bowerman. He's like, oh, so this is where the legendary Steve Prefontaine hangs his head. He's like, Bill, what are you doing here? Kind of in shock. And he talks to his fellow bartender. He's like, hey, can you give me a second? He's like, Bill, can you meet me out back? So he meets him out back, and he's like, Bill, what's up? And he's like, Steve, what are you doing here? Why are you bartending? He's like, people look up to you. And he's like, Bill, don't give me any shit. I can't live off food stamps my entire life. Obviously, the Amateur Athletic Union doesn't care about us. He's like, what do you want from me? He's like, I need to pay my bills, And Bill's like, listen, you know what? I was most proud of you. And Steve's like, no, when? He's like, the Olympics. Oh, he's like, the race that I lost, I got fourth place in. And he's like, you ran your heart out. And he's like, in that race, at that point of competition, at any given day, anyone can win or lose. You ran your last mile of a 3-mile race in 4:04. Some people struggle to do that in a 1-mile race, let alone 3 miles. You were amazing. He's like, the biggest problem you have, Steve, is you're not willing to admit you have talent. And he's like, no, I don't believe in talent. And Bill's like, but you do. Your body is able to pump more blood through your body and give you longer strides. And your willpower, it doesn't matter how strong it is, you physically have a natural talent on top of your willpower. So they get in this long argument. They're both flustered. We cut to the next day, and we see Steve show up at track practice. He's no longer part of the team because he graduated. Bill's giving this speech to some of the new recruits, and he's like, hey, Bill, how you doing? Hey, guys. Bill, do you mind if I work out with you and the guys? And Bill pulls him to the side, and he's like, for right now, I think we should just focus on you running by yourself, just putting the miles in. I don't think running with a team is the best strategy. So we see a lot of, montages of Steve training and running. And we get to a scene where he's talking with Jeremy Sistu, Frank Shorter, and he's telling him about they're doing an event for the college to raise money to restore the stands and the stadium, and he wants Steve to run. And Steve's kind of unsure about it at first. He's not sure if he wants to do that, but he's convinced. And basically, that night, we see Steve go to talk to Bill again, and Bill's like, "Here, try on these sneakers," and they're essentially the first pair of prototype sneakers for Nike. Steve tries them on. He goes for a big long run. Bill's like, "So, what do you think?" He's like, "Oh no, they're great. Do you think you can make me a couple pairs?" And Bill's like, "Sure." And Bill, excuse me, Steve asked Bill, he's like, Bill, can I ask you some personal advice? And he's like, sure. Bill's like, sure. What do you need? He's like, women, what do like, how do you and your wife get along? And he's like, how do you get along beside your differences? He's like, Bill's like, she's a complete and total mystery to me. Our differences are big, but you know what? We get along because we respect each other and we love each other. And Steve's like, oh, okay, and then he proceeds to tell Bill about how he was offered to turn professional. He was offered $200,000 to turn professional, but he's not sure what to do. And Bill's like, listen, I know $200,000 would be a lot for you and your family, and I'm not going to be the one to tell you to turn it down. But obviously, if you become a professional runner, then you can't be qualified for the Olympics. And Steve's like, yeah, and that's what I'm thinking too. He's like, I'm at this point, I want the Olympics. The 1970 Olympics isn't that far away, and I want to win it. So he decides to turn down the offer to become a professional runner. And we cut to the next day, and it's the big race to raise money for the stadium. And him and Frank Shorter have an agreement before they start the race to take turns in the lead. They'd swap laps. One lap, Steve would be in the lead. Second lap, Frank would be in the lead. He'd give people a good show and a fun time, and it would make for an exciting race. Well, what ends up happening is when we get to that last half a mile of this 5,000 race, Frank decides the hell of it, throws the rules to the side, and who wants to win the race. Steve's ego is way too big to let that happen, so it's in the last lap, essentially the last straightaway, like it's neck and neck, and you're like, shit, is he gonna pull this off? But he does. He manages to pull in the big win and garner the big race. So we cut to later that evening, and he's at the party. They're having a party to celebrate. All the athletes are there. Mary ends up showing up, and he's like, Mary, how are you? Excuse me, guys. Let me get a sip of water here. They get into a conversation. He's like, I want to talk to you. And they talk for a brief second. They kiss. You can see they're on their way to making up and trying to figure out their relationship and navigate things. Steve's turned a leaf. You can see that he's not the same depressed athlete he was when she first came across him when he came back from the Olympics. So they get in a conversation. You can see they're making up. Steve runs into Kenny Shorter, Frank Shorter, I'm getting these names wrong today, guys. And he's like, dude, I got a killer toothache. Can you please take me home? I need to get some rest. So he's like, yeah, sure, I'll go ahead and I'll take you home right now. So he says his goodbyes to Mary. He's like, I'm going to be right back. And while they're in the car, he's like, so, you want to run a quick 10 tomorrow? I'll pick you up at like 9 or 10 in the morning. And then Frank's like, listen, I'm in agonizing pain. We'll play it by ear. So he drops him off. And the next thing you know, we see Steve, and he's driving back to the party. And we hear the music Rocket Man playing in the background by Elton John. And we see him take a turn, sharp turn, and you see this car with the headlights glaring, and it like kind of careens into him, and then you see Steve in his car flip, and then unfortunately you cut to the next scene, and it's Bill Bowerman in his bed with his wife, and it's like 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock in the morning. He's getting a call, and he's like, what? He hangs up the phone, and his wife, what happened? He's like, Steve just was killed in an accident, a car accident. And everybody's somber. We cut to our next scene, and it's at the track, And Bill Bowerman's talking, and he's like, Steve said, in his next race at the Olympics, his goal was to set the record for the 5,000 meters, and it was 13 minutes and 13 seconds. That was what the race that he wanted to run, and he was talking about how he could do it. So I'm going to deliver this eulogy in 13 minutes and 13 seconds. And he says, Steve was a rare athlete. He's someone that fought me from the start. He didn't want to change his ways as far as his running style. But he's also somebody I respected more than anyone in the world. And he was a tremendous athlete. And everybody goes up and says their kind words about Steve. And, the movie rolls, credits, and that's it. This guy, 24 years old, he dies in 1975. And, a lot of people, they're like, oh, well, he got fourth place at the Olympics. Sorry, buddy, but you're not hot shit. You're fourth place. But if you watch the race, you ran the race to win, This guy is, like I said, he's a rock star, if it's possible to be a rock star of long distance running. It's such a sad thing that he died at 24. And I think pretty much everyone thought that he would come back to the 1976 Olympics and just rock it, because he's 21, and in the 1972 Olympics, and 21 for a long distance runner is you're still a baby, you really are. Also, it's interesting because, like the Lassi Viren, the guy from Finland, no one's able to, I don't think we've been able to find a 100% confirmed answer, but people said that he was accused of doping, something with, they do something with the bloodstream, and where you're able to get more oxygen and you're able to essentially run quicker. Now, keep in mind, that was perfectly legal until 1986. So even if he was guilty of this, it doesn't necessarily mean that it was illegal. He said he just ran in places where it was a lot of uphill running, uphill training, and that had a lot to do with why he was as good as he was. And some people just say he essentially was just the better runner. I don't know. It's hard to say. They only ran against each other once, and yes, Steve did lose this race. But I genuinely believe that he probably would have won in the 76 Olympics. And I think a lot of people believe that just because he was such a force to be reckoned with. And he just was such an icon, just such a class act athlete. So that is my breakdown for Without Limits. I kind of gave you an overview, guys, and yes, I did fumble along the way. I promise I'm going to get it back into the world of editing. I'm going to be not getting back into the world. I'm going to be doing that at some point in the near future. Just waiting, like I said, waiting on a couple things, so this will flow a little bit better. I think this movie is excellent. The connection I have to it is my past as a runner, but also just the performances are fantastic. Even the supporting minor performances are just great. I focus a lot on the big three names, which are Donald Sutherland, Billy Crudup, and Monica Potter, because I think those are the key components, the core of what makes this movie special. Billy's just a talent, man. Like I said, I've loved his career ever since I saw this movie. This is the one that brought him to my attention. He's done a lot of fantastic films, some of it in the indie world. I think a lot of it in the indie world, like Keith Gordon's Waking the Dead with Jennifer Connelly. That's a fantastic film that not a lot of people talk about. He obviously has done stuff like, like I said, Almost Famous. He was in Watchmen. He played Dr. Manhattan. So a big mainstream movie like that. And, he's done a lot of stuff like even 3 or 4 years ago. I know a lot of people don't like the DC stuff, but he was in The Flash. He played Barry Allen's father. And like I said, he's done a ton of stuff off Broadway and on Broadway. And he's just got a tremendous amount of talent to him. So, like I said, I like the movie because I feel like the acting is strong. the story is tragic, but yet it's such an incredible story. And Robert Town did a fantastic job directing it. The cinematography is gorgeous. There's really nothing in this film that, like, when I think about like the film, there's nothing about it. There's really no weak points. They really do justice to this guy's life and shining a light on it. So I think it's something worth checking out, guys. I think you'll really enjoy it if you haven't seen it. Unfortunately, this one is not playing in any of the streaming services. I mean, you can rent it from Amazon Prime. It looks like they have it for like $2.99, or you can buy a digital copy for $4.99. I mean, the DVD, I think you can pick up pretty cheap. I think it's like $10. I'm still hoping one of these days they'll put out a Blu-ray release, but we'll see what happens. So that's my review of and breakdown of Without Limits. Couple quick shout outs. Number one, to my wonderful fiance, Jessica Fernari. Check out her incredible artwork at Meowchi Roar on Instagram. Next shout out goes out to my boys, Brad and Troy at Not a Bomb Podcast. These guys take films that bombed at the box office, and every week they determine whether they were genuinely a bomb or not. Like Thursday, they dropped their newest episode, and they covered the 1996 zombie film, The Girl with All the Gifts, with Glenn Close and Gemma Arterton, and that's a great film. It's a great little genre movie. They did a wonderful job of giving its due, so check that out. Then you have The Gentleman's Guide to Midnight Cinema with Will and Sam, and these guys are awesome, and each week they find these films that I've never heard of before, and I feel like I know a lot of films that people haven't heard of before, and they shine a light on them. These guys are also incredible and well worth your time. And then we have Jose and Justin over at Watch Skip Plus. What these guys do is they cover the stuff that's out in theaters and the stuff that's currently streaming, and they give you what their thoughts and opinions are on the films. They also do something cool. They cover stuff like, if there's a new art exhibit going on and what their thoughts and whether they liked it or not, or a new product that came out that they like. So they do the reviews of films, but then they also cover stuff like that too, which is great. And then I'm going to throw a fourth one into the mix this weekend, guys, for you. I'm going to throw in Life is Short with Justin Long. And the main reason I'm throwing that in this week is because Justin Long happens to be good friends with Billy Crudup, and they did an interview about 3 years ago, and it's about maybe 40 minutes. You can find it on Spotify. If you go on Spotify and look up Life is Short with Justin Long and then search Billy Crudup, you'll find it. Because they're friends, the interview is very funny. It's very insightful. Billy talks about his life growing up and some of the characters he's come across, and it's not just your typical, about talking about your career. It's talking about life, and it's definitely well worth your time, and it's entertaining. So check that out. I'm going to be filming episode 12. It looks like Sunday, and I'm going to have a special guest joining me. So I'm looking forward to giving you more information about that. It looks like we're going to be talking about the film Carnival of Souls. So be sure to look for that. Hopefully I'll have that up no later than Monday. So you guys have a great weekend, and I look forward to seeing you guys soon. Thanks for following.